A very warm welcome to you all for our next session. How can systemic coaching support our ability to broaden awareness and facilitate change? Mapping the system, finding your place. My name is Jenny Linden. I'm an SGCP committee member and I will be chairing this session. In a moment, I'm going to introduce you to your speaker, John Whittington. But before I do that, there are just a couple of things that I want to mention to you. Firstly, as SGCPs, gratitude to our sponsors, the School of Psychology, the University of East London, and Coach Hub. And very, as I say, our appreciation goes to them for their sponsorship. If you're interested in checking them out, then please do follow the links on the virtual hub. In terms of this session, John is going to be speaking for about 40 minutes. And there will be time at the end for Q&A. So please do post your questions into the Q&A pod. And also, I'd really encourage you to post your reflections, your thoughts, your ideas throughout the session. And I shall be monitoring that and be able to feed back your thoughts and ideas and reflections to John as we go, or indeed at the end. So let me now introduce you to John. John is founder of Coaching Constellations and author of Systemic Coaching and Constellations. He works both online and in person internationally, training coaches and coaching. He also contributes to the MSc program in coaching and behavioural change and the executive training program at Henley Business School. And this session is going to help us to understand the stance, principles and practice of systemic coaching in terms of our practical applications, including in leadership coaching. So I shall hand over to you, John.
Jenny, thank you. What a lovely introduction. That's and thank you for looking after this session for us. This is a new experience for me, seeing that there are 90 people in the group and I can only see myself, which is a really strange experience. It will take me a little bit of getting used to. Even Jenny has disappeared now. Now, Jenny said that I'm going to be talking for 40 minutes. Actually, this is really experiential work, and so I never talk for as long as 40 minutes, you'll be pleased to know. I'm really going to talk for about 10 minutes, and then I usually ask for somebody in the group to come forward and we'll work on an issue live, because this is a form of somatic coaching. It's embodied coaching, where you're drawing the information from the system and trying to work at the level of the system. And it's best to experience it rather than just to talk about it and stay in our heads. But I've discovered 10 minutes ago that that would be impossible on this platform. So Jenny has very kindly volunteered to be my client for the 20-minute demonstration in the middle. And then we'll come back to a few summary thoughts and Q&A. So I want to start by sharing a little bit about kind of what I mean by systemic, because there are lots of different forms of systemic coaching, and the word systemic often brings up very different ideas and meanings for coaches. So it's common, for example, for systemic coaching as a phrase to be understood as team coaching, and the sort of systemic coaching I'm sharing with you very briefly this afternoon is really not just applicable with teams. It's useful for yourself, for working with one other, pairs, triads, teams, groups, and whole systems. So what I've been asked to speak about, and my thanks to Jonathan Passmore for suggesting that I speak at this conference following my teaching at Henley, is how systemic coaching with constellations, and I'll explain what constellations are very shortly, can help us to broaden our awareness and facilitate change. So that's the fairly tight focus of these few minutes we have together. And I want to help differentiate this kind of systemic coaching from other forms of working systemically by just throwing a few words down that I hope will help orientate you to where I'm coming from. So it's really, systemic coaching is really thinking about the flow of life, actually, and of leadership in organizations, because we're each and all born from and into a living system. So when I am talking about systemic, I mean thinking about our belonging in systems, and in particular, the experience of belonging in that family system, first of all, our primary system of belonging, and then all subsequent systems, and how that shapes our beliefs, our values, our life and work in so many ways. And it's belonging that really sits at the heart of this way of working. And we have a particular focus and interest in the impact of our belonging and indeed our embeddedness in systems. We're all embedded in multiple systems. And in a very simple kind of PowerPointy kind of way, just really to reinforce what I've just said, is that we're born into a family system. And our family system is the primary pattern maker for our work and life. We first of all find out in that family system how to belong and whether it's safe and whether we are recognized as individuals as well as being a member of the system. And we soon tune into, through our nervous system, the unwritten rules of belonging in that family system. And we carry the resonance and the impact of that through the rest of our life and work. But that family system, of course, is embedded in another system. It's embedded in our social system of origin, our land of origin. We all come from somewhere that we might call home, although that can get disturbed and confused depending on our origin story. And then as we pass through childhood years and into our young teenage years and adulthood, young adulthood, we join and belong and leave different educational systems, some of which will be nested in our original social system, and some of which will be close, and some of which will be far from the values and behaviors and rhythms and patterns of our family system. So we gradually learn to leave the field of our family system and learn what it costs and what it takes and what's required to join, belong and leave other systems. When we've finished with our education, and some of us are going back to educational systems, I know I love learning, you can never finish that, can you really? We move into professional systems, and perhaps you can remember the first professional system in which you belonged, the experience of joining, the experience of belonging, and the experience of leaving. All of these experiences stay in the body as well as the mind, and we carry them forward with us into the next. And then perhaps you find yourself in a second professional system, discover that the rules of belonging in the second one are slightly different to the first one, and different to how things were at school or university. And the impact of leaving the first one has an impact on how you join the second one. And so it goes on until you find yourself perhaps in a third professional system or a fourth. And there, perhaps not, things start to feel a bit shaky, or you feel it's time to get out of this profession or this professional path or this particular system. Or perhaps you have a difficult leaving and you separate yourself from those kinds of systems and become independent. And perhaps you become a coach or a psychologist, and you find a new way of belonging and new rules of belonging that you create yourself. And yet you notice that you still bring your patterns through your joining, belonging and leaving all of these systems with you. And perhaps you also notice that you attract clients with similar patterns to your own, particularly the ones you've tried to ignore or push aside. So that kind of is the underpinning idea underneath systemic coaching, is including the joining, belonging and leaving in all of the systems behind us. And as an approach, it's both practical and profound. You could call it an applied philosophy. The overall intention is really to create the conditions in systems for change, for balance, and for flow. The system that is us as an individual or an individual client, the system that is what we call a team, and the relational system that is the whole organization, and indeed the system that is the relational field of the whole world that we inhabit. So this is what I mean by systems. I'm talking about relational fields and the hidden dynamics, patterns and resources within them. And I've since I've been studying this work for 20 years, I've been looking for a metaphor for this understanding, in particular how you can look at your client with systems in mind. And I think this is a useful way of thinking about our belonging in systems, is to remember all the systems in which you've belonged behind you, like peacock's tail feathers, where each of the eye spots in your tail feathers represents a system in which you've belonged, a relational field in which you had a place, in which you joined, in which you belonged, and discovered in that belonging what it took to belong. And if you're a normal human being, some of those belongings will have been joyful, and some of them will have been painful, and some of the leavings will have been complete and resolved, and some of the leavings will have been incomplete and unresolved. So the first move we need to make if we are to be systemically orientated coaches is to be able to look behind us, ourselves, and to see something of the systems in which we belonged, and allow all the joining, the belonging and leavings in the systems to be included in us. And this begins to create the conditions for coherence and flow in the system that is you, when we can allow everything a place and give everything a place. So how do you do that in coaching? Well, it's a shift really to looking at your client, and there he or she is on the right hand side, as just an individual, and starting to include the truth, the dynamics, the entanglements, the resources in the systems behind them, both in the system in which they occupy a role at the moment, and also all of the systems in which they belonged. And this requires a certain inner distance, and this work is about being useful in service of creating the conditions in the client and the system that they occupy, rather than leaning in and being too helpful to the individual. You're keeping the individual and the system in view at the same time. I'm making a fundamental shift, and I'm sure you're all already doing this, from the myth of the organizational chart and the belief that an org chart tells us really where the power lies, where the dynamics are, and how things are in the system, to the reality of leadership, which is really far more complex than that linear perspective. It's a multi-nodal, interdependent, complex system to manage. And if you imagine that person standing there as a leader, or indeed a leadership coach, you begin to get a sense of the complexity when you take the whole system into view. Of course, that's oversimplified because systems are moving all of the time. And the relational field of an organization is one of the most complex systems that you can work with. I'm always telling students on the trainings that family systems may be more emotional and appear to be more complex, but actually organizational systems are far more complex. There are far more people. There is a lot more joining, belonging and leaving, and traumas, mergers and acquisitions, and the whole system is moving all of the time. So I think contemporary coaching of whatever framework, it requires us to be able to work with system dynamics that are moving at speed in a very strange world, particularly the one we're in at the moment. Of course, if you could get inside that flock of murmurating starlings, you'd find that there's some kind of invisible information field that's held in between, in the spaces in between. And it's getting access to that field that will tell us what's going on in the system. And if you want to coach with systemic awareness, you need to be able to see that field. You need to be able to see the system. And to see the system, you need a map. And that's what a constellation is. A constellation is a shared visual map between you and your client that allows the client to surface the truth of their place in the system in a three-dimensional relational mapping process. And every constellation, which is a facilitated process, starts with a map that looks something like this. And it's the client, not the coach, who is facilitating this map and is moving the elements within the map and finding their place. And in one way, it looks very, very simple, and it is. And it has several benefits. First of all, it gives you a very practical way of moving from a coaching conversation in the head to a coaching constellation, which is a whole body experience. Because the client is physically moving objects around, they're in contact with their body and their somatic felt sense of the issue. And the difference between their story of how things are and how things are when they map them are always striking. A constellation is really a map of the unconscious image in the client. Now, of course, over the last year, we've had to move from this physical mapping with clients in the room, like everybody else, and find a way of making it work on Zoom, and I'm pleased to say it works very well. We've created a digital version, which we'll be demonstrating in a moment. So this mapping process you can use very effectively yourself, a bit of self-supervision. You can use it with your clients, either in person or one-to-one online, and you can also use it in combination with other existing models and frames. So this is a William Bridges change and transition model, very useful model as we move through change from ending through the neutral zone to a new beginning, and using the stance, principles, and particularly the practices of systemic coaching and constellations can bring these models to life in a very useful way. Constellations are very, very useful. Mapping and constellations very useful with teams. This is a picture of a senior leadership team in a bank I was working with a couple of years ago, a European bank, where they asked me to support them in finding their voice as a senior team. This is them here, in amongst a number of other senior teams. Each one is the head of a division. And they realized through this mapping process, especially when I asked them to give a sense of direction to the other teams, that none of the other teams were looking at them. And they had a job to do in terms of communication, first of all, and finding their place and relevance in the system. Constellations are also very effective with teams in the room, actually using their own bodies to stand in relative space in relationship to each other around issues like looking at their customers or their purpose or their conflicts. This also works very well online as well, very effectively. We run a whole series of masterclasses in coaching constellations on using the methodology with teams, and again it can be used, overlaid very well with other models. But today I wanted just to give a little flavour, at least, of working one-to-one. And I was going to ask, as I mentioned at the beginning, if there was somebody in the group who feels they are stuck in some kind of murmuration or issue that they would like to explore, and then discovered that that wouldn't be possible. So Jenny has kindly volunteered to step forward and be a client of the process, just to give you a sense of how it might go. And before I ask Jenny to show her screen, I'm just going to share my screen again and just show you what it is that I've sent her in advance. So first of all, this is a picture of the representatives, the wooden representatives. Here they are. I've got some on my desk, very useful. And when we went into the pandemic, of course, we made an online version of them, and that's what is underneath that picture. In fact, I'll get rid of that picture. And here we have a digital version of the same thing. So it's like a top-down view of the same representatives, all of which can be moved and orientated in relative place, relative size, and relative direction, which are the things we're interested in a systemic map if we're going to get inside that murmuration of starlings and see what is going on, and to invite the client to set up a relational map. So I'm going to ask, first of all, Jenny, if you could just give me a sense of what is the issue that you'd like to explore today, given that we know we probably won't get to resolution, but we might get to just see what's going on in your unconscious.
Okay, thank you very much. So my issue that I'd like to explore today really comes out of coping with the pandemic and may resonate for others as well. And that is the pressures, particularly over the last 12, 14 months that COVID has placed on me, both in my working and my personal life, and just feeling at the very same time I need more space for looking after myself, rest, recovery. I have got so many pressures coming in, and that would be really interesting, I think, to map that this afternoon.
Yeah. Okay. So just at the time when you need the rest, there's more work coming in. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I've sent Jenny this Jamboard link already just to test that she could see it, but we haven't really done anything with it. So Jenny, if I could ask you to share your screen so that we can all see what you can see, because then we'll be able to see your cursor and where you're looking.
There we go.
Lovely, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
So your question is really about overwhelm, I guess, about feeling overwhelmed by how many priorities you have. And oh, I think you just shared a different screen there.
Oh, okay. Better. That's back again.
Yes, lovely.
That's it.
So now, first of all, did anything I've just said in the introduction resonate with you at all, or pique your interest that might be, do you think, consciously or unconsciously connected to this issue?
I think so. I mean, I think for me it was the interconnectedness, and what was sort of revelatory, and I'm not sure why, because I kind of feel I probably ought to have known this already, was just that perhaps some of the sources that I see as pressure are actually conversely support in a slightly different context. So I was trying to originally, when I sort of deal with the work-life balance issue, try and categorize this is work and this is non-work, and of course that doesn't get you anywhere. And then I was sort of thinking, well, maybe if I think of things in terms of pressure and support, but that doesn't get me too far either. And I think what I got from your introduction was the interconnectedness, the kind of weaving. I love the imagery of the peacock and the feathers and the patterns, because that for me just kind of is my world at the moment. It's really difficult to disentangle.
Yes.
You know what?
Feathers.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So do you recognize this pattern of feeling a little bit on the edge of being overwhelmed by too many priorities from a previous system, or is this the first time it's ever happened to you?
It's certainly not the first time it's ever happened to me. I recognise the characteristics, but I think the intensity is different this year.
Right. Yes.
So I think that the characteristics are similar, but yeah, it would just be the intensity that I'm feeling particularly this year. And as I say, it's particularly, I think, I say normal times, pre-COVID, I think I felt more able to to find spaces for rest and recovery, and to find my resilience and to work with resilience. Whereas the last year, there have been moments when I thought, I'm not able to do that now. I'm not able to apply, positive psychology, self-coaching interventions in the way that I would normally. And I explain that in terms of thinking about the intensity of all of the issues, I guess, that we're dealing with.
Yes. And all of this stress, of course, and feeling like that ends up in the body, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yes. And interestingly, that's what I'm craving at the moment. I'm craving a space where I can get some physical and psychological respite from what feels like often an onslaught.
Yeah.
And I really want that kind of embodiment to be able to go into green spaces and breathe and just be, and not have things spinning around in my head and thinking about the next deadline or the next priority.
And what would you call that thing if it had a name? Maybe it's an energy, or it's time and space, or spaciousness. What would you call it if you could summon it up as a resource?
Respite, I think.
Respite. Okay.
Yeah.
Would you choose something from the left-hand side? It could be the blue or the grey or one of the shapes or anything you like at all. Represent respite for yourself and put it in relationship to you.
Okay.
Looking at your life and work. And then, yeah, that's lovely. So you told me earlier that you're interested in paralinguistic work and the use of language, which is fascinating. And language forms a key part of this. And I wondered if you could just click on the me representative so that you're connected to your energy, and looking at respite, find some words, and I can offer some for you that may or may not be right, but it'll give you something to rub up against, as it were, to invite that quality in. So the words I was thinking of was something like, thank you for being there, please resource me. Does that make any sense? Just check if it resonates in your body rather than as an idea.
Yeah. Healing is coming through. The word healing.
Healing.
Please heal me. That's coming through.
Please heal me. Yeah. Okay. Lovely. Okay. And how does that feel when you look at the blue circle, and what comes up for you when you say, please heal me?
It is an energy. It does feel like an energy.
Yeah, and it looks like one you're familiar with, that it's an old friend in a way.
Yes.
You've lost touch with a little.
Yes. Yes, that's right. Yes.
Say to that energy, I haven't forgotten you.
I haven't forgotten you.
It's just I've been too busy to see you.
It's just I've been too busy to see you.
How does that feel?
Sorry, I missed that.
How does that feel?
It's it's interesting. I think what's really fascinating for me about this experience is that it's, as you say, it's not something that I wasn't in contact with or didn't have. I've just lost touch with, and that's very empowering. So the resource is there.
Yeah, of course. But if you can't see it, it's difficult to imagine it, isn't it?
Yeah.
But bringing something that you've lost contact with and it's become invisible in your inner constellation, it can be, and in general, at the moment, especially with most of my clients sound very much like you're describing it, exhausted and overwhelmed and feeling stuck. It's first of all, before you do a constellation or a map of what is just to put you in touch with your resource.
Yeah.
And there may be inner resources, and you've identified one, a healing energy that you have within yourself, and also outer resources. Before we come to outer resources, just see if you're the right relative size. Do you want to make the resource bigger, smaller? Now you've had that little dialogue with it in your heart, as it were. Just see if what feels true. All we're interested in is what feels true and authentic, not what you think might be look good or.
Definitely bigger. I want it to occupy more space.
Yeah. So say to it, him or her, whatever it is, I'm going to give you more time and space.
I'm going to give you more time and space.
Yeah. So it's like an inner contract you're making. Yeah, there you go. So naturally, you can tune into that energy as well. So this green circle has come to represent you and your inner life, I think, as opposed to work-life balance, etc. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So what else might resource you, or who else, to face into the current pressures? Is there anything else that you would want to include?
In terms of my...
In terms of something that makes you feel more resourced, as in standing in your authority, calm, clear, breathing. What, is there anything else apart from this quality, this energy you brought in, that comes to mind? It may be enough.
Probably that feels enough. I mean, I'm encapsulating within that my ability to self-coach and
Yes. Yeah.
heal.
All of your skills and
Yeah,
experience,
yeah,
and something else beyond that as well.
yeah.
Yeah. So, would you like to choose a representative from the left-hand side, maybe the square or the circle, for representing your work, and place it somewhere?
Yep.
Preferably, I was going to suggest outside of the circle.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
Only, yes, well, what you've done is, of course, far more accurate than. Okay, go to where your first instinct, because that's, of course, information, isn't it?
Yeah.
And turn and face the work. Just turn your representative a little bit so you're able to be in contact with it. Yeah. And what comes up for you is what would be the truest thing you could say to work when you look at it like that.
I think I wanted to place it above me because at this very moment in time, it's feeling a little bit oppressive, and that's just because of where we are in the academic year.
Yeah.
It's been an intensive year in
Yeah.
higher education.
Well, this is what overwhelm is. It's
Yeah,
over us. It's
exactly.
of us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
Um, but off but in it but pre-COVID,
yeah.
I often find work as sustaining, as energizing. So I think...
Yes, I see that. So I was going to offer you a sentence to say, which sounds a bit weird, but we'll pretend there aren't 90 people watching. I was going to say to the representative for your work, I love you, if that's true.
It is true. So I
Yeah,
am going to say it.
yeah.
I love you to my work. Yeah.
And you're a bit too much at the moment.
And you're a bit too much at the moment.
You've got a bit too close.
You've got a bit too close.
Please look kindly on me if I step back a little bit.
Please look kindly on me if I step back a little bit.
And resource myself first.
And resource myself first.
Do you want to try doing that? Just slowly, see if moving your representative away a little bit, or moving work away, and just do what feels really true. And yeah.
I do like the idea of it being outside the circle.
Yes.
It's interesting. My first instinct was to bring it into the circle,
Yes.
feeling it very much on my shoulders, oppressive, but
Yeah.
actually now, yes, pushing it outside.
Yeah.
It's powerful, actually. That's just that visual imagery is really
Yeah. And
powerful.
we're not really doing a constellation here. We're just we're warming up almost to just get you ready to look at the issue. But that in itself, I think, like much coaching itself, it's all to do with the contracting stage, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I like the way you keep clicking on the green circle. It turns into a blue square as well. So it's like a defense, like a castle.
Yes.
Around you. Right? And so
Yeah.
there you are in your inner life, resourced by this healing energy and all of your experience and talent and knowledge. And there's work a little bit further away. How does that feel in your body?
Yeah. actually, I like that. It's and it's tangible. You know, I've got that imagery now, and in my head, and I feel I can, you know, take that, and I might well reproduce that on an A3 sheet and sort of draw some things
Okay.
around that.
Yeah,
But I do like that, and I like the idea that I can. Well, it's the boundary, isn't it? It's thinking about that boundary between self
yeah,
and work, and I think particularly when we do such creative work, sometimes that boundary is permeable,
yeah.
which is a good thing. I mean, it's a privilege to do such creative work,
Well, you're
but
not
it is,
doing
yeah,
a job, are you? You're doing your life's work,
yeah, yeah.
which
And
is
yeah, so I think actually that boundary is really interesting, and I think perhaps I
yeah,
can do some more work in thinking about that boundary and where it can be permeable, where that's
yeah,
appropriate and effective, and perhaps where it should be less permeable.
yeah.
So yeah, it's really interesting.
So tell work, I have a boundary around me,
I have a boundary around me,
which is becoming increasingly clear to me.
which is becoming increasingly clear to me.
It's important for me.
It's important for me.
You're over there, outside the boundary,
You're over there, outside the boundary,
and I'm in here, inside my boundary.
and I'm in here, inside my boundary.
And that's how we'll work and live together from now on.
And that's how we'll work and live together from now on.
How's that feel?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. It's just actually what's rising for me at the moment is a sense of agency,
yes,
that
lovely.
I've got more control over this than perhaps I
Yeah,
felt I did have at the
yeah,
beginning
yeah,
of
yeah,
our session.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's a, you know, this is such a common dynamic, particularly at the moment. And I've written a bit about it's called Burnout to Belong in my book on systemic coaching. I don't
Mm,
think that's the case here, but there's very often with clients I'm working with, there's the work represents such a key part of identity and the
mm,
organizational system in which they belong and often lead
mm,
is so mixed up with themselves that there is no boundary.
mm.
And so
Yeah.
they are burning out to belong because perhaps
Mm,
belonging was difficult in their family of origin. Organizations, psychologically, we know, represent the mother. So we
mm,
join organizations hoping to be taken care of, end up leading them, and exhausted and burnt out,
mm.
especially those people who are stuck at home, difficult
Yeah,
domestic
yeah,
situations. So,
yeah.
yeah, thank you for bringing this.
Oh, thank you. I've really enjoyed that, and
Good.
it's given me a lot to think about. So thank you very
You're very
much.
welcome. Thanks, Jane. If you wouldn't mind just unsharing your screen,
Yeah,
um, that would be great. Thank you.
there we go.
And I'm just going to share something which actually my graphic designer only created yesterday for a meditation that I was writing for a training. I encourage you to take in systemic coaching is about this journey around the head, heart, gut, our three centers of intelligence, and integrating and creating coherence and flow between those three centers. So I invite you to sort of take in whatever you've taken from that initial mapping process in that way. And a picture helps you do that. So yeah, do screen grab that, and I hope it serves you well. Thank you, Jenny. So I'm going to share another 2 or 3 slides only, and then going to go into Q&A, aren't we? So very briefly, just to sort of conclude the kind of key points I wanted to make. So yeah, we're all flying around in systems in these murmurations, and all relational systems, because that's what a system is, it's a relational field, generates a field of information and dynamics. And systemic coaching and constellations allow you and your clients to walk in that field, and guided by the client, as you've just seen in that very brief example, able to access embodied information that's in the client, but also in the wider system. And all of that is in service of the whole, the health and flow of the whole person, the whole system. And sort of step one really is to imagine your own joining, belonging, and leaving in systems behind you. And step two is then to start doing that with your clients. so that you can see the peacock's tail of the individual in front of you, or the team, or the organization. They all have their own tail feathers. If you're interested in this in any more after this brief introduction, there's the book that I wrote on this subject, the 3rd edition, which is that one, which I'm pleased to say I finally got the peacock's tail feathers on the front cover. Has been out for a few months, and I hope you'll find it interesting. So, time for Q&A, I believe, Jenny.
Indeed, we've got some really interesting questions. So I'll start with the first one, which Georgina asked, but others have also echoed their interest in. Fascinating session talk, thank you. I'm curious about the approach you take, asking the client to say sentences that you've constructed. Would you ever ask them an open question or get the client to generate their own statements?
Yes and yes, but in a 20-minute demo, I'm going a bit quicker than would normally. However, there's a big difference between cognitive coaching questions and the systemic resonant sentences that I was offering, and that is probably the most difficult part of the learning journey. And we've just introduced a new section on the training just to teach the language of systemic coaching, because you're trying to reach in with these sometimes provocative sounding sentences to see what's really true in the unconscious and to offer them to the client lightly. And as Jenny did, she either said no, adjusted it slightly, or just repeated it because yes, it was true. So absolutely, I was giving perhaps a rather purist demo there. I may, of course, also mix in all kinds of other uses of language, clean language, NLP, coaching questions into a coaching session. But in a constellation, that kind of language can be very, very, very useful.
Great, thank you.
Did you feel that they were directive or sort of got in your way at all, Jenny?
Not got in my way. No, it was curious for me because I haven't had that experience of that sort of more directive approach, and of course I understood the context of the demo, but in a way I liked it for the reason that I probably wouldn't have constructed those sentences myself. So it was giving me an opportunity to try them out, to try out something that I wouldn't have constructed, to see how it felt. And as you say, sometimes it didn't quite sit and I adjusted it slightly. And other times I thought, actually, I quite like that. And I really like the idea of talking to work. I mean, I've never thought about that before. And I certainly wouldn't have done it without having it modelled for me. So
you wouldn't normally say I love you to your work.
No, you wouldn't.
I could see that quality in just the way you were sitting and the way your breathing was going, and that you love it, but it's just a bit too much. So I offer that sentence just as a test. And if you said, oh God, no, John, I don't love my work, I want to leave, then great. Okay, we'll go down that track then. But it's a way of giving the client a fast way to get to what's true for them.
Yes.
It's not my idea. I'm testing a hypothesis. That's all.
Yes.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, really interesting question and discussion. Thank you. Another question's come in. What about your thoughts about people who do not start life as part of a traditional family system and have more of a precarious template that they start from?
Yeah, well, that's really important. I mean, that's where we start is our foundations, and I've written quite a lot about people who are adopted, for example, or come from families where there's a breakup soon after birth. And those all have their own tail feathers and stories and dynamics. And that's many people who have a difficult start in life end up in psychology or therapy or coaching for that very reason, that they're trying to find their place in a system. And I don't want to say anything too general about that. It's such a tender question because I don't know the circumstances of the person asking it. But yes, it has a huge impact, of course, on our relationship to belonging and the 3 human hungers, which are belonging, safety, and recognition. So the way we coach and the way we are and the way we feel safe in ourselves is very much dependent on how we started.
Thank you. Thank you. And that's yeah, that's really such
That's
an
good.
important point, isn't
Your
it? How
origin,
we
yeah.
have
Yeah.
come to systems in different ways.
Hmm.
Um, Another really interesting question: would healing be organised within a team? Perhaps if you've got had any examples or experiences working with coaches where perhaps a healing process has come from within work and from within being within a team.
Could the team itself offer the healing? Is that the question?
I think that's the question. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, healing is not a word I ever use in corporate coaching. Because people tend to sort of, the other word I never use is constellations, or I'm going to invite you into your body, because people usually start looking for the fire exit. I just do it and they get into it and laugh a bit and then they get over themselves and it's fine. But I think the work itself is often described as very respectful and profoundly healing. But that's coming from clients who say that the effect of doing constellations in a team has been healing. But of course, there's a great deal of resource in a team that can heal itself, and that would be the first place that you might look in a constellation, just as we did just now. What do you have already that resources and resources your healing and recovery and gives you that resilience? So yeah, I may not have understood the question right, but
Yeah, no, I think that's how I understood the question, and I've certainly had that experience where
yeah.
being in touch within a team, the resources
Mm, mm.
and the support of each other can
I
be
think
incredibly
that
powerful and
teams
healing.
can be very generative and supportive like
Mm.
that, and
Yeah.
they can be extremely toxic and painful for people to
Yes.
belong.
Yes. Yes.
And of
Absolutely.
course, a
Yeah.
team reminds us of our first belonging, and if that was difficult, we're likely to recreate those conditions.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
comfort of familiar pain is very strong.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got one final question of my own, but I'm aware we've only got 3 minutes, so
Ah,
it may be
all good,
it may
all
not be able to do justice to it. I'm not sure. I'm really curious about the difference between the coaching constellation work online and face to face,
good.
because what
Mm,
immediately when you put the image up of the pieces and the how you work with people in a
mm.
face to face context, I could see it was tactile, and I like the visuality online. What are the differences that you've found between the two modalities?
Well, last March I thought, oh, well, that's it. I'm going to have to retire now because this will definitely not work online. I mean, I've been facilitating constellations for 15 years in the room with groups and teams and individuals and with objects and with people. But my goodness, it actually works incredibly well. The field energy seems to transmit itself incredibly effectively. Yesterday, I was facilitating a training in Poland with people from 6 different countries, and people in the group, there were about 12 in the group, were representing. Um, they were representing people in one of the persons in the group who was the client system, and they were able to pick up the information across the airwaves immediately. The combination of using a Jamboard that I used with you and representative perception, so people in a group picking up and representing. So if we'd had another hour, I would have asked somebody to represent your healing energy. I would have asked somebody to represent your work, and they would have reported from their experience. So I'm quite pleased in some strange upside down way that we're still online, because it's enabled us to reach people all over the world in many time zones, and also add this dimension of relative size and as well as place and direction. This was not possible until we were online. You can make the representatives bigger or smaller in the way that I asked you to check the relative size of you and your healing energy.
Yeah,
So it's it's really works really well online. Is my
yeah.
experience. But I should really ask you, because you've just
Well, it worked brilliantly. Absolutely. I'm really, really interested. And I think the online world has opened up so many
yeah.
new possibilities. I'm aware we're about to get cut off, so I just want to say a huge thank you, John.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed that. And a huge thank you to our audience as well. It's been a wonderful session. Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
indeed.